All right, so talk to us about, so this is kind of getting into quality and things, which really was the driving force behind Center of Excellence. Mm-hmm. So why don't you talk to us about kind of what Center of Excellence is and how that improves quality here at Northeast Georgia?
So this idea came, we do have a very collegial environment amongst surgeons here. I think that is an unusual thing just out as close as Atlanta. I just don't think that we see that. And it's something that I've always valued here. On the other hand, we still there's a competition there. And it's a good competition. It's healthy. It's friendly. But I've been trying to put you out of business for like 20 years. And I just finally figured out that I couldn't do that. And so what can we do together to move the needle and to improve patient outcomes? So somewhere around 2017, we were having a conversation, and what can we do together? How can we make things better? And came up with the idea, ultimately, of the vision where we landed was, what if we created some sort of center of excellence and did this together? Well, as you know, that doesn't happen overnight, and there was a lot of, how can we make this easy from an IT perspective? How are we going to use the robot to be able to do that? Eventually landing on a company called SRC for the Center of Excellence certification, because we didn't want it to be hollow. We wanted to actually have to go through the steps of standardization, go through the steps of making sure that everybody's post-op instruction was the same, making sure that we were monitoring outcomes, return to the operating room, length of stay, readmission rates, all of those things. And right in 2020, March of 2020, we finally received our designation. And as everybody remembers, 10 days later, we shut down the operating room for COVID. And that did give us the opportunity, because we were sitting at home at the time, because we had no place to go and work, and gave us the opportunity to think about, okay, well, how do we let people know? How do we market this to the surrounding communities? And what's our vision over the next 5 years of where we would like to end up? And really to be the referral center for the entire north half of Georgia, and then to expand that regionally into the surrounding states. And I think that's kind of where we ended up. I mean, if you look at our heat map, if you will, of patients that are coming in, we certainly bring from the surrounding states. We certainly bring from Atlanta. Nothing makes me happier. But we wouldn't be able to do that if we weren't offering the high-quality patient outcomes that we do offer. And to that point, I think that you have actually looked at some data for us over the past 3 years, starting in 2020 and continuing through 23, comparing our outcomes with the remainder of the system.
Number one goal when we started it was to let everybody around here know, hey, listen, you don't need to go anywhere else.
Right.
We're doing everything that anyone else is, and we're having outcomes that are better. And we firmly believe that. And then by getting certified by SRC, we actually were able to prove that with data that they looked at from 2017 to 2020. But then we kept collecting that data. We have 2 full-time people who just do data here at Northeast Georgia for our Centers of Excellence. That's their full-time job, is just looking at data and outcomes, and it all goes back to what you're talking about. It is, we just want to keep getting better. We want to keep providing better patient care. So what we did was we got past our 3-year recertification in 2023, and so this February, we had a robotics symposium here. It was our 2nd annual. Really proud of that. Just a great event to highlight all the different specialties that use the robot and all the research and stuff that's going on at this quote-unquote little community hospital in Gainesville, which, of course, it's not a little community hospital anymore. But so what I presented was our 3-year data on our Center of Excellence, our hernia Center of Excellence. So just the bottom line of it was when we compared outcomes from Center of Excellence surgeons and compared that to non-Center of Excellence surgeons, we had lower recurrence rates, both for inguinal and ventral hernias, so groin hernias and midline hernias. And we had lower readmission rates, so really improved patient outcomes. But the real kicker was that we had these better patient outcomes while having significantly more complex patients. So 25% of our patients were recurrent inguinal hernias. So somebody had already tried to fix it and failed. They were very large hernias, meaning 10 centimeters or greater. So, 10 centimeters. So, I mean, that's bigger than a softball.
Right.
Okay. And you got a hole that big in your abdomen. It takes what's called a component separation to get that back together. You have to actually take the layers of the abdominal wall apart and put them back together with mesh in the middle of them, which used to require a big open procedure, probably in the hospital for a week, very high risk of wound infection, all those things. And we now do that through 6 little bitty 8mm incisions, and people go home the same day. I mean, it really is an amazing deal. But we were able to show that even doing those kind of complex patients, we still had better patient outcomes. We still had lower recurrence rates. And just to put it in a bigger picture, and I will be the first to say this is early data. When we look at papers, and we're doctors, we're scientists first. So when we look at data, most of this data, at best it's 3-year data, but a lot of it was 18 months. The average is probably about 18-month follow-up,
Right.
which is not long when we're talking
not
about
at
hernias.
All. But if you read a lot of hernia literature, a lot of the data is 30-day. Yes.
We won't.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I mean, that's a great point, is that we're unhappy with the fact that our follow-up is only 18 months, but in the scheme of things, a lot of times all you get is 30-day follow-up.
And so when people have looked at retrospective data, big papers, and I agree with the point of the Carolinas Medical Center came out with the article last year that had a really important conclusion in that hernias are a chronic disease process. It's
Right.
not just a single issue. There's multiple issues going on here. These are unhealthy people. These are patients that have multiple medical problems, and all of that weighs into your hernia, and that makes it a chronic disease process. Totally agree. And in looking at not only their data, but data around the country, they said that, the recurrence rates can be as much as 30 to 40%
Right.
in some of these type patients. At Northeast Georgia Medical Center, our 18-month average follow-up, that 3-year data, ours was 2.7%.
Right.
Our recurrence rate was 2.7% for ventral hernias.
Mm-hmm.
And for inguinal hernias, we were 0.7%, 0.78, if
Right.
you really want to know that.
Right.
So we're extremely proud of that, to be able to put our data up against those big university programs and go, listen, we're not just over here hanging a sign on the front of our, hospital that says Center of Excellence just as a hollow marketing scheme.
Right.
This is real data. These are real patients, and they are really doing better.
Right.
Another thing that has really been impressive from a system standpoint has been the number of other hospital systems that want to know what we're doing. So can you talk about that and kind of who we've had and who's come here and why they come here?
Yeah, so actually this is a great program. It's done through Intuitive. It's called TPO, or Total Program Observation. And what it is they bring a hospital team. So by team, I mean they may bring C-suite, their CFO or CEO or COO. They may bring their VP for surgical services. They'll bring their robotics coordinator. They'll bring a group of surgeons. And then they'll also bring staff members, which is even better because they get to see the work that we do. And they also include sterile processing, all of the things, maybe even anesthesia, because it really takes a big partnership for us to make this machine work.
Yeah. You and I get to sit here behind the microphones a lot of times, and everybody talks about the name that's on the front of the chart.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just was casually scribbling on the back of a piece of paper the number of people that are involved in just getting a patient from my office, that discounting all the people in my office, but from my office.
You shouldn't do that. You get in trouble for
I
doing
know.
that.
I'm fixing. Yeah, I'll probably get a phone call. Even if you just take out the people in my office, or even add them in, I mean, it is a list of people that are involved, and each of those has a role in the patient experience, and that's really what we consider to be so important. So, what other programs come here to look at is that patient experience, and how do we have an efficient program, meaning we do more cases per robot than 0.2% of the programs in the world. And so how do we do that but maintain that patient experience? So that really takes a team of people all functioning and working in the same direction.
So you just said we are in the top 0.2, not top 1%. We're in the top 0.2% in the world.
That is correct. In terms of efficiency on our robotic systems, so if you take our robot-only rooms, those are the rooms that we only do robotic cases in. For instance, room 22 in the Gainesville campus, we do more cases on that robot per quarter than 99.8%. Thanks, math is not my thing. 99.8% of programs in the world.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So
and again, that has extremely little to do with the two of us.
Very little. I mean, we talk about the importance of a surgeon champion when you're doing things in the operating room, and I think communicating between surgeons is best done by surgeons. On the other hand, that surgeon champion is responsible for being a part of that team and recognizing how important the other members of that team are. So again, I mean, we have anesthesia on our robot steering committee because the blocks that we do before surgery, it's an important part of our throughput and patient experience. If the less narcotics we use in the operating room, the less narcotics you need in PACU, the less the narcotics you need when the patient goes home, and we know that improves outcomes.
Yeah. And people have less pain.
Less pain and better outcome. Yeah. It's hard to argue against that. Sterile processing. We don't have unlimited resources here. So I depend on sterile processing to be able to take the instruments that I use at the beginning of the day and make sure they're available at the end of the day for those final cases and for anything that happens later in the day. So that's a very important piece. If there's a delay there, then there's a delay in the operating room. Being able to get the patient out of the room and the next patient into the room, very important to us because, yes, it's efficient. Yes, it's a better business model. But the reality is, you and I both know that when we see a patient in the office, if I can only do 4 cases a day, I'm booking 3-4 months out. Nobody wants to wait that long. It's a horrible patient experience. So if I can do 6 to 8 cases in a day, though, then I'm able to operate on more people, provide a better patient experience, a less wait for the operating room. So really and truly, it is all about the patient, but that efficiency is part of the piece of that patient experience that we are so proud of the staff that does that. Circulator in the room, the scrub tech in the room, how they turn over the room, parallel processing, all of those things that they do so well, other people want to come watch.
Yep.
And so we're actually, as soon as we get done here today, we have the pleasure of going over to one of our total program observations, and we'll do a presentation tonight, and then they will actually be in our workspace tomorrow, seeing how the staff does it, seeing how SPD does it. I think that there is nothing better for our staff than to see them in the space and for us to be able to brag on them about how great they are. That has been a great cultural experience for us, and I hope that we can continue it for a long time. We actually are one of the busiest TPO sites. I believe that Intuitive has cut down their TPO sites to 9 in the country. We're one of those 9. We're the most popular East Coast program for sure. We have a waiting list of about a year. We do 1 program every month. There are some months that we do 2, not by choice, but we do 2. And we are actually, because, again, back to we just want to keep improving. We are actually making a site visit to one of the most popular programs on the West Coast. We're going out there in August to see what they do.
Yeah.
How can we keep improving our program? How can we keep staying relevant in that field while at the same time maintaining that patient experience?
So where are some of the places that people have come from? We've had Pennsylvania.
Well, Pennsylvania. We had Sarasota. We've had
Denver.
Missouri.
New Jersey.
Washington.
Yeah.
We have had a team from Washington.
Let's see, Wisconsin. 2 or 3 from Florida.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Texas.
Right.
So it's been
literally has been all over the
all over
country.
the country.
And the great thing is the relationships that we're able to develop with some of these
yeah.
teams. And for instance, I had a NISQIP question. We're trying to implement that. And the Sarasota team was able to answer that for me. So I was able to reach out, get in touch with their program coordinator. And so just having that relationship and being able to, they call me, the last group from Missouri that came, one of the surgeons called me about 2 weeks afterwards and said, hey, talk me through this. I had a couple more questions about that.
Yeah.
And it's just been fun to develop those relationships. So it's something I really enjoy. It does take an evening, but I think the value of that for the team and for our program and where it puts us on the map in terms of other programs across the country, I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think that for our staff, for our leadership to see how good our people are, and what how we do this patient experience, because that's all we're trying to do. Is we want every one of our patients to have that smooth. It's this circle graph that we look at all the time about how much time do people spend. And it's really, we want every single patient to have that great experience.
Right.
We want every single patient to move through that system smoothly. Do they all do it? No. We all make mistakes. But
it's a goal.
Something happens and you get delayed or something, and you don't want that to happen. But we really have such great people that make things run smoothly, and you and I get to hear about that in our offices every day.
Right.
The staff here doesn't hear about it because they don't see those people back. But, we see people every day that come in and go, man, your staff was awesome.
Yeah.
Man, I will never go anywhere else other than Northeast Georgia because, and quite honestly, I've had people come to me from Alaska, from Oregon, from definitely Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina all the time.
Yeah.
To come to Northeast Georgia Medical Center because this is where they heard it is the place to be, and they're right.
Yeah.
I mean, I am super proud to work here and never have any hesitation of bringing people and knowing that they're going to be well taken care of.
Right. Yeah. I agree with that 100%. I think the other thing is, as we have done more and more of these visits, is the realization of how many people touch the patient. Like we were talking about earlier.
Exactly right.
If you have a terrible registration experience, it's going to color the rest of the journey that you have. So It's very important to have a good partnership with your registration team. And, how long does it take? Do we make the patient come in and then they wait here? And then we put them there and they wait there? And how can we improve or streamline that? That's something that, if you're not looking at it and seeing it graphically, you may not realize all the places that the patient has to go before they get in the operating room. Right. It's really, it's quite impressive. And all the pieces of the puzzle, labs and everything that has to come together. It requires IT and lab and anesthesia and SPD. All of that together has to work in concert.
Why, you and I think this is kind of why this system is so has been so successful, is that, yes, we have great surgeons here, and not just in Hernia Center of Excellence, in all of we really are spoiled as far as the level of surgery here. But the reason that that there's a special place is because of it's the whole experience. Yeah, we worry a lot about patient outcomes. We worry a lot about hernia recurrence. We worry a lot about surgical site infections, and we follow all of those data points and all of those things. But that subjective patient experience is just as important.
Right.
You know, I mean, we're in a service industry, you know, and we want to provide a good service to our people. So, I mean, I think, you know, that's, like I said, I'd never hesitate to suggest to anybody that I see, hey, come on over.
Yeah.
You need your hysterectomy, you need your knee done, you need your, this is where you need to be.
We got people.
We got people. That's right.
We had talked a little bit earlier about one of the things that we consistently hear amongst colleagues. Well, you know, the robot costs too much and it's too slow. Walk us through that and what your opinion about that is currently, any data to support some of those opinions, and where we are today just in terms of using the robot.
Okay. Why don't I talk about, let me hit on kind of the robot's just too expensive. Okay. And this is a very awesome piece of equipment, but yeah, it's a big capital expenditure. It is something that the hospital has to really think about. Is this worth it? You know? And a former CFO here once told me, said something that was really insightful. He said, Chad, why don't you do what you do and go operate, and I'll tell you if you're losing me money. He said, because that's my job.
Right.
And he's right. And so what we've figured out over the years is, you know, there are advantages to the robot that make it fiscally viable. You know, one of the biggest things, and we saw this from the beginning. I saw it in my practice. This is the first thing that I saw in the data I collected when I first started doing robotics in 2013 and 14, is I was doing a lot of colon work at the time. And so for left-sided colectomies, my length of stay doing them laparoscopically, and I was doing them laparoscopic, small incision still, but when I changed from laparoscopic to the robot, my length of stay went from 5 days in the hospital to 3 days in the hospital. People went home 2 days sooner.
Right.
So when, you know, I was operating them on, you know, Monday, they're going home Friday. Well, now they're going home Wednesday. You know, that's huge.
Right.
And that goes back to that patient experience. We also know that the shorter amount of time people are in the hospital, the less risk they have of getting something else.
Right.
You know, because I always tell people, sick people are in the hospital. If you're not sick, get out of here.
Right.
So,
Right.
You know, so if you're in the hospital, you're, you know, risk of pneumonia, risk of, you know, wound infection goes up, risk of DVT or clots in your legs goes up, all of those things. For the longer you're in the hospital, the more complications you can have. So we saw that decrease from 5 days to 3 days on left colons, from 3 days to 2 days on right colons. You know, that's huge, decreasing by 33%.
Right.
To put it into some perspective, that was 2013 to 2015, okay? We now fast forward to 2024, where we have, you know, 2 colorectal surgeons in the system now who are both doing a lot of robotics, as are pretty much anybody that's doing a lot of who's a colorectal specialist is using the robot nowadays. Right. I mean, it would be unusual for somebody not to be. It's just shown that much advantage. Right. But you know, their length of stays are now 1.2 days for colons overall.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's within 10 years, we have gone from people staying 5 days in the hospital down to 1 night in the hospital.
Right.
That's huge. I mean, and the key is, it's not just, let's see how fast we can rush these people out of here. We are maintaining good outcomes. Right. You know, we are still at lower surgical site infections, lower rates of anastomotic leaks, lower rates of abscess than we had back in 2014.
Right.
And that's just a function of all of these things that we're doing with the system, you know?
And I think that, to your point, we're not just pushing patients out earlier. I think it's transitioned to the patient asking, can I go home? I feel fine. Yep. And that's been a big change as well, you know, transitioning, again, back to the whole program of you've got a block, you're not using a lot of narcotics, your return to bowel function is probably shorter, and you probably got a better TV at home, and you might want to get back to it. And I think that I think they were actually challenging us to become okay with sending patients home that we used to keep 3 or 4 days. And now they're challenging us at day 1 or 2 to go, well, why should they stay in the hospital if they're ready to go home?
Yep.
So it's been a huge transition for us.
Yep. And then there's other, from just a plain cost standpoint, we look at something like an inguinal hernia. Okay, it's just an inguinal hernia, right?
Right.
And quite honestly, when we look at inguinal hernias across the United States, you can do them. You can repair an inguinal hernia open through an open incision. You can do it laparoscopically, little bitty incisions, straight sticks. You can do it robotically, little bitty incisions with wristed instruments and using the robot. No matter how you do it, if you're at a place that is pretty good, your recurrence rate for that hernia is going to be about 1%. Okay? There are places around the country that do all open hernias and have a 1% recurrence rate. David Chin out in out in California. I mean, the guy talks all over the country. He's awesome.
Right.
And there are places that do all of these. The two big questions are, okay, how much is it going to cost you? Well, from a robotic standpoint, everybody would say, oh, well, the robot's got to be the most expensive of those. It's not.
Right.
Laparoscopic inguinal hernia repairs cost more than robotic inguinal hernia repairs.
And why is that?
Because with laparoscopic inguinal hernia repairs, there's two different ways to do it. One way, you're using balloons and tackers. So a tacker is imagine like a nail gun.
Yeah.
All right. Like a long nail gun that you're using inside the body to secure the mesh in there, as opposed to robotics where we just use a suture, just like you're sewing up a cut on your arm. Same thing. We can just sew inside. So obviously that little suture costs us a couple bucks, and that tacker costs probably like $800 or in that range.
Yes.
So that's the biggest thing is those balloons and those tackers or whatever we're using to close things. So just from a cost standpoint, everybody assumes, oh my gosh, it's the latest technology. That's got to be the most expensive. It's not.
Right.
And then you start adding in that other thing that we talked, that length of stay. Those days in the hospital, this is a pretty expensive hotel room.
Very expensive. Absolutely right.
So if you can lower that cost of care, that helps everyone. That helps patients. That helps the hospital. That helps the community, because now we just opened up a bed that, that person
Somebody
that's
else can
in
utilize.
the ER with the heart attack, my grandma that's in the ER that's got the pneumonia she's sitting down there for 3 days because we got a full hospital.
Yeah.
Well, if I can decrease my length of stay on these patients, I'm opening up beds for those people.
Right. And we're never at a point where we've just got open beds anymore. I mean, it seems like since COVID started, we've just transitioned, become more of a tertiary facility, looking forward to opening up some more beds in our new patient tower. But the reality is we still have patients waiting in the emergency room. So whatever we can do on the surgical platform to make sure we're still providing that high quality outcome, but either the patient doesn't stay at all or they go home earlier, we're actually helping the community in that we open up a bed for somebody else that needs it. And I think that's been a big thing. Are there silver linings to the COVID cloud? I hate to even say that out loud, but one thing it taught us was how to do more outpatient surgery. What do we need to do to transition that slightly more complex operation into something that can go home from the PACU that never even goes into the hospital? And I think that the robot helped us do that during that transition, because there were, does every hernia, is that an urgent emergent operation? No, but there are some that need to be fixed sooner than others. And to be able to do that on the robotic platform, patient never stays in the hospital. They go home even though they had a more complex operation.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to point out, we talked a little bit about cost too much, but the other thing is it's too slow. And I think we've addressed that from two angles. One is the efficiency status. So, room setup, room turnover, we are at least on par with the other rooms, and quite frankly, we're probably the standard for other rooms on the robotic service line. But the other thing is volume matters. And so we recently looked at a little bit of data just for gallbladders from 2018 to 2024 on the Gainesville campus. And it actually, the average time to do a gallbladder operation, cholecystectomy, on the robot is now less than the average time that it takes us to do a laparoscopic gallbladder operation on average across the bed. Now, plenty of confounding factors, lots of reasons for that. But I just thought it was interesting that we're now at a point where we can say it really doesn't take any longer. And I think you've made the point several times that easy gallbladders, I can do it either way, and it's just as fast.
Yeah.
Terrible gallbladders, and we occasionally run into just awful gallbladders, probably quicker on the robot.
Yeah.
Better vision, better visualization of the common bile duct. We have Firefly. We can light it up in ways that, yeah, can we do it laparoscopically? Yes, but there's some tweaks on the robot that make it a little bit more visible. So safer and just as fast.
Yep. And I think that, that learning curve of the robot is really what we're seeing across the country. And luckily here at Northeast Georgia, we're kind of ahead of it because our program started in 2008, and we started growing from there. And so we've got a lot of surgeons here who have been doing robotics for over 10 years.
Right.
And are well through that learning curve. They're not past 50 cases, they're past, 500 cases.
I think we're up to 6 surgeons now that are over 1,000 cases. Of that, I think 3 are over 1,500 and 1 is over 2,000 cases.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's
a lot of experience, and that puts you in about the top 3% of surgeons worldwide if you're over 1,000 cases.
Yeah. So that's, that kind of experience is what allows us to have the outcomes that we see. But I firmly believe that it's not just unique to this hospital. I think that we're going to see those same kind of outcomes from robotics at other hospitals as well once they get through that learning curve. And so we see a lot of things in our literature and general surgery news and wherever about we looked at the data from this and we looked at the data from that. We looked at robotic gallbladders from 2010 to 2019 or whatever, the first 9 years of gallbladders done on the robot. And then we're going to make broad sweeping generalizations about that. Man, everybody, this is a very complex tool. It takes some time to learn, but the nice thing is it's much easier to learn than a lot of other stuff we've had to learn. It's much easier to learn that than learning a lot of the complex laparoscopic procedures. And I think that
reproducible. That's
very
the thing.
Reproducible, outcomes from center to center, from surgeon to surgeon. And then you start adding in all the adjuncts for teaching that we talked about earlier with the DV5, of the mentoring and the objective feedback data on continuous improvement and all of those things. I just think that I'm really proud of how much both we as surgeons and the robotic company has focused on continuous improvement. How are we going to keep getting better? And from a time standpoint, or the robotic surgeries are just so slow. That's merely a learning curve, getting through it, and we've shown that here at Northeast Georgia. Like you said, our data shows it. We made it through the learning curve, and we're now faster robotically than we are laparoscopically.
Right.
That's just awesome.
I agree. I was actually kind of surprised by the data. We pulled it to prove just the opposite and found out, oh, wow, we're actually a little bit faster on the robot than we are laparoscopically. So we've probably got to close this out at some point. So why don't you take us through what you're most excited about over the next couple of years with the new technology? What keeps you coming to work and being excited about coming to work?
So from the technology standpoint, I honestly feel like DV5, we are scratching the surface of what we're going to be able to do with that amount of data, with that amount of computing power. You know, we've put a computer in between the surgeon and the patient, and it's just enhanced everything we can do. Everything I can do with my hands, everything I can do with my brain, and you know, we're putting all of that into our surgeries. So I'm super excited about what we're going to be able to do for patients from that standpoint. I'm excited about the mentoring teaching aspect of it, being able to help not only like my junior partners, you know, or, you know, surgeons at other one of our other 4 campuses. You know, I mean, I think that the raising the quality of care in our whole system is right at our fingertips now. Right. And we have a lot of really awesome colleagues who are really smart and, you know a lot more than I do about this or a lot more than I do about that, that it'll be great to use that. You know, and quite honestly, the reason that we keep coming back is because of patients. I mean, it's every day we see somebody that comes in. That's why I love doing hernias. Somebody comes in with a problem, and I can't tell you the number of patients that have come to me and said, "Yeah, I've been to 2 other surgeons, and they said they can't touch me."
Yeah.
You know, or you know, this is my 4th hernia repair, and I can't bend down and tie my shoes anymore. I can't go to work. You know, I can't lift my grandkid.
I gotta go into the other room when I pass through TSA at the airport.
Yeah, yeah. TSA agent made me lift my shirt because they thought I was smuggling something underneath it. True story.
Yeah.
But you know, and then you know, we're able to do an outpatient surgery in one day, and send these people home, and they come back in 2 weeks and go, "I'm good to go, doc.
Right.
Thank you very much."
Right.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, and that keeps us going.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for the same things. You know, just what we'll be able to do with the data that we are now collecting. Again, I think we don't know what we don't know right now, but just having that inkling of where we might be able to go really keeps me coming to work every day to see what the next thing is going to be. Yep. So it's great spending time with you today. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. See you tomorrow in the OR.
Yeah.